I started off studying physics and astronomy, and I started work life as a physicist, but I ended up doing my PhD studies in public policy, and I've worked for over 15 years as policy advisor or science diplomat, as it's sometimes called, and sometimes dealing with some very challenging issues. So I hope that I can share some insights. So the frame for this talk is that I'm sort of imagining that I'm giving advice to the Astronomers for Planet Earth group to start thinking about political advocacy, and also bearing in mind that we are not powerful stakeholders in this climate policy system. But saying that, I believe that we do have a unique perspective and an important message to bring to the table. And I also just want to distinguish between advocacy and activism. And activism, is something that you can do right now, and I believe that it's needed. And especially after hearing Michael Mann's presentation, I mean, we need protest. We need to put pressure on politicians. But what I'm talking about is policy advocacy, and this is different. This is something that takes time, and it takes care, and it takes strategic thought. So it doesn't quite have the same urgency, and it's a bit slower. So I'm going to organize this short talk around 3 different areas or kind of themes of guidance. So first, the importance of talking to individuals as the locus for change in a policy system. Second theme is appreciating the complexity of systems, accepting it, understanding it, and learning to live with it, and working with a template around this. And then the third is the need to create focused plans with clear objectives and messages, and knowing what you want to communicate. So the first topic is how does change happen? So when we were looking where to focus advocacy actions, what's more important? Is it politics? Is it political systems? Is it organizations? Is it bureaucracies? Or is it individuals? And what can you do when you are not a key actor inside the policy system? So I have a little story about this. Before I very happily moved to ESO, I used to work for NATO, and I was the head of a policy advisory team. And we got tasked with all sorts of interesting and challenging problems. And one of them was to look into the issues of autonomous and artificial intelligence systems for the military. And this is a very difficult question with complex legal and ethical and technical aspects, and a very strong industry aspect. Now, the military is actually quite good about institutionalization of sort of diverse thinking. So we had a policy team that was very diverse, and somehow we found ourselves with a robotics professor who was the chair of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, which is an advocacy group for running things like the campaign against killer robots. So that was one of the things that they did. And this guy actually helped us solve many of our problems on this. He gave us advice, and he worked with us, and even wrote some of our paper. And at some point I asked him, why are you working with us when you're fundamentally opposed to what we're doing? And he said, look, I know I'm not going to change the defense industry overnight, but projects like these allow me to understand how you people think, so what you believe, and I have the chance to repeat my message over and over and over again. And at some point when you're writing a policy, maybe you'll include a little bit of it. And actually we did, and he had quite a simple message in the end, that basically a human in the loop should be present in these systems. But kind of reflecting on the experience afterwards, what he did for us is he gave us a new way of framing the problem, sort of new ideas that we didn't have before. He made it acceptable in our group, in our system, to think about difficult aspects of the problem that we might not have thought about before. And he helped us uncover our diverse preferences. So in any heterogeneous group, there's this psychological barrier to change, because people don't want to be the one to sort of raise a problem and kind of go against the group, to be the guy who's starting off dancing on the hill in this picture. But when you discover actually that many other people have concerns, it reduces the barrier, and sort of dealing with the complexity and the difficulty becomes more socially acceptable. And this is exactly what happened in this case. So, you know, the end point is that, well, the first idea is that actions to bring new ideas and new problem framings towards policymakers are critically important, and that kind of individuals initially are the basis of policy change, kind of irrespective of the overall political system and what's going on. So speaking of systems, well, the second step is understanding the system. So we have to take steps to understand it and understand the complexity. So here is an early model. So when people started to try and model how policy change happened, you know, this was one of the early things that they came up with. So a linear cycle. And of course, this is completely not the case. And actually, you know, maybe looks more like this. So this is illustrating an influential model called the multiple streams model of policy change. And basically what it's saying is that, you know, in any given policy system, there are sort of multiple streams of things happening that are somewhat independent. So there's a policy stream or a solution stream, people focusing on solutions and ideas. So this could be new carbon capture technology, you know, new regulatory structures for carbon pricing. There's a problem stream. So, you know, only a tiny fraction of problems and solutions receive policymaker attention. So there are groups working on making people pay attention. And I think in the climate side, you know, there's lots of activist groups that are doing on this, you know, just raising awareness of the problem. And then there's a politics stream. So this is the politicians, you know, looking out for jobs in their district, even if they are fossil fuel industry jobs. And then there's the process stream, and this is the predictable cycle of legislation, you know, the EU multi-annual financial framework or the US congressional elections sort of taking place at predictable intervals. And policy change happens when certain people called policy entrepreneurs are able to find moments to bring these streams together. And, you know, that's when policy change can happen. So, you know, we want to try and team up with policy entrepreneurs or be policy entrepreneurs, which involves a lot of work. And, you know, to go further with this, so we really need to sort of appreciate the system complexity here. So, you know, this is a map of the obesity policy system in the UK, which for some reason I was reading about recently. And, you know, we have to really understand the dynamics and the intricacies and the fact that seemingly positive actions on one side may make the problem worse on others. So, you know, each one of these bubbles is an entire policy system in its own right, with solutions and activists and politics and powerful industry interests. So, you know, it's not so straightforward as just to understand the evidence in general that obesity can be medically harmful. And, you know, we should not get wrapped around questions like, why don't politics pay attention to evidence? And, you know, it's essentially because they can't control the system. And, you know, the evidence is rarely sitting in the exact context of solutions. The understanding about what the problem is or what the question is keeps changing. So it's not necessarily a question of just sort of more or better evidence. And of course, especially in our democratic systems, we have the nature of politics. So what can we do about this? So here is a sort of template for action, for advocacy in these complex systems. And this is kind of trying to summarize years and years of policy studies in one slide. So the first thing is, you know, it's kind of obvious. You've got to have a deep contextual knowledge of the policy system. You've got to know the key decision cycles, know the key events, and think in systems. So those kind of system diagrams that I showed earlier. Another part of this is the belief systems. So if we genuinely want to articulate our viewpoint to others and have effective engagement with people, you have to understand the different beliefs and worldviews that they have. And we have to take time to understand those. And, you know, there's lots of examples of this. So, you know, the different views about the role of government versus markets in society. And, you know, there's people that have very, very strong beliefs about this, and we have to try and understand them. So the second bullet here is to build networks of supporters with the skills, interests, and capacities to help us achieve goals. So what this means is, you know, we need to expand our list of allies sort of within our initial domain, kind of keeping a focused coalition on sort of astronomy, space, because change comes in numbers if we grow our group. But we also need to team up with like-minded organizations sort of in the same sector, and we can piggyback on existing groups, use their experiences. This allows us to coordinate repeating of our message across many groups, and it's also able to bring in kind of new ideas with this idea of having a network of diverse ties. So the weak network is more likely to provide original information and access to resources in ways that are not necessarily available sort of just in our own astronomy group. And then the final point here is, we have to sort of act or be policy entrepreneurs for a long period of time, sort of years, basically. And, this involves knowing the bureaucratic politics and processes, which is important for low salience actors like us. We have to know how to communicate. We have to know what we're trying to communicate, and then have this sustained engagement over long periods of time. And this involves looking for these kind of critical event windows where change can happen. So there's a nice article that was written by Michael Mintron that kind of summarized all this, so I can put that on the Slack channel. So the third kind of set of guidance is about writing a plan. So if you don't start with a written public affairs plan, you sort of bounce around and just will be driven by the moment. So a public affairs plan provides purpose and direction. And basically we have to think like a corporate lobbyist, because that's what they do. We have to be strategic and focused about transmitting our message. And I think that astronomers, are in a unique position, to show the full range of hellish and very far away worlds that are out there, and that there's no planet B. And we have a sort of certain credibility, and we can enlist the support of, our celebrities. So the Nobel Prize winners who have, high status, and there's a lot of evidence to show that high status individuals can affect policy change. And we have to target our message in certain key events. So I just want to kind of bring some of these ideas together in the situations happening right now. So for the non-astronomers here, there's this problem of satellite constellations, and basically there could be up to 100,000 satellites launched into low Earth orbit in the next decade. And any one time you might have 5,000 additional satellites overhead. And this is going to cause some problems for astronomy. And this beautiful night sky background that I have here in my Zoom background. So I'm part of some various working groups. I'm going to be starting a UN project actually very soon, where we're trying to do something about this and try and protect astronomy. Now, there's been a bit of criticism in a way of our approach, and sort of people saying, well, why don't you take legal action? Why don't you call for a public moratorium? Why are you talking to these evil capitalist space companies run by billionaires? And there surely is a space for private citizen groups to kind of take a more activist position, and it could apply pressure. But I think there's also a risk of it backfiring on us for the worst because of the nature of the policy system that we're in at this current time. So for the official astronomy organizations, I think we should take a more nuanced approach to this, and that's what we're doing. So, the first step of this is to appreciate the complexity of the system. So, we're looking at the current regulatory landscape, realizing that we don't have a legal standing to actually do anything at the current time. There are existing and well-established policy systems around this area, and also around the area of space debris and space traffic management. So astronomers are the new actors in a way, and the solution requires all countries to agree on something. So this is sort of similar on a much smaller scale to the climate problem. And there's very strong political and military and industry aspects in this domain, which are very important to governments. So our template for action, bearing in mind what I just said, we're taking the time to understand the landscape, learn about the satellite authorization process, learn about the laws, learn about the industry. We are talking to the individuals in this policy system, and now we are bringing them new ideas and issues. and I've been in multiple working groups with industry people. And I think that there is this sort of slow absorption going on. And I think that many of these people do care about the night sky, and they don't actively want to damage astronomy. So, you know, we are sort of exposing them to this kind of issue all the time. And then we're also looking at events and opportunities where we can make a difference. So one, as Hannah mentioned, is the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And we worked with the IAU earlier this year, bring the issue there. We submitted a paper, and you know, this is an easy way to sort of start raising the issue with many governments at once. And then finally, we are working on looking at regulation. So there's an event that's taking place in a few weeks, SatCon 2, which is on the US side, and you can sign up and register for the workshop if you want. And this is a very, very difficult thing. It's really, really challenging because for these policies, it's all about the criteria and the thresholds. You know, what's the threshold of harm? How do we define that? What is satellite constellation? You know, is GPS or the Galileo system one? Do we include that in, or all these fantastic Earth observation systems that we have? So it's not necessarily about, you know, just Starlink and Amazon. So it's very, very challenging. Okay, so it says 4 things, but it's actually 3 things: individuals, complexity, and creating specific plans for advocacy. So thank you.